My name is Paige Mercer. I was 25 the night my parents took me to dinner to tell me I was adopted and that they'd only kept me for the benefits. My father slid the paperwork across the table. They had already filed to cut me out of everything. I didn't cry. I didn't say a word for almost a minute. But here's what neither of them knew. 6 months before that dinner, I'd found my birth family. And that night, I had seated them 3 tables behind my mother's chair. She just hadn't turned around yet. The restaurant was called Vanterre. My mother chose it, and Diane Mercer never spent money on me without a reason printed somewhere on the receipt. She wore the gray cashmere she saved for funerals and board meetings. My father Wesley had booked the table under her name, not mine. There was no banner, no cake, no balloon. For a birthday dinner, the table was strangely bare, and the air between my parents had the careful politeness of people about to read a verdict. I'd spent 4 years booking tables like this for clients, for signings, for the quiet conversations families have when somebody dies and the money has to move. I knew the difference between a dinner and a deposition. This had the temperature of a deposition. I set my own thing beside my water glass, a thin manila folder, plain and unremarkable. My mother glanced at it and assumed it was a resume. She had no idea what was inside. You have to understand what birthdays were in our house. When I was small, my birthday meant 1 candle pressed into a grocery store cupcake my mother bought on the way home and never bothered to refrigerate. I'd watch it sweat on the counter while she took a call. Meanwhile, 3 weeks later, my cousin Brett got a rented bounce house and a caterer with little quiches on silver trays because Brett was blood. I remember asking the year I turned 8 if I could have a party too. My Aunt Renee answered for my mother, "We can only do one nice thing a month, honey." She said it kindly. That was the part that taught me the most, how kind people can sound while explaining your size to you. By 9, I had stopped asking for cake because I could see it made the arithmetic easier for everyone. Being easy felt like the only currency I had. I told myself it was efficient. That's the thing about growing up useful. You don't notice you've been priced until somebody reads the number out loud. I left that house the week I turned 18 with 2 duffel bags and a community college acceptance I'd filled out myself. Nobody drove me. I worked nights at a pharmacy counter and took classes in the morning, transferred to state school, finished a paralegal program while waiting tables on weekends. I paid for all of it. By 25, I was a paralegal at a trusts and estates firm downtown. I spent my days inside other people's wealth, drafting beneficiary designations, distribution schedules, the quiet language that controls who eats and who doesn't long after the funeral. I could read a trust the way some people read a face. The joke of my life was this: I could set a perfect boundary for a total stranger. I could tell a grieving widow exactly what she was owed. But I could not ask my own family to want me. The only person I ever called was my grandmother, Nana Ruth, every Sunday at 4 o'clock, all through college and after. She was the one Mercer who answered the phone like she'd been waiting for it to ring. When I was 12 and crying in her kitchen because Brett had told me I wasn't a real Mercer, Nana put down her dish towel, took my chin in her hand, and said the sentence I carried for 13 years, "You were chosen, sweetheart, not collected." Then she made me a grilled cheese and let me stay up too late. Nana died when I was 23. Within a month of her funeral, my parents quietly moved out of their cramped split level and into the larger house on Linden Road, the one connected to Nana's name in ways I understood better than they realized. I didn't think much of it then. I was grieving. But there was something Nana had said to me on one of our last Sundays, her voice thin over the phone. "I made sure you'll never have to ask anyone for your own life." I thought she meant it as encouragement. It would be 6 months before that dinner before I learned she had meant it literally in writing and notarized. The year before I turned 25, my family started going quiet around me. Texts that used to come back in an hour took 3 days. My mother stopped looping me into holiday planning. My Aunt Renee, meanwhile, started using a word in the family group chat she'd never bothered with before: blood. As in, this is a blood-only weekend at the lake. People don't usually turn cold on a schedule. Families drift, sure, but this wasn't drift. This was coordinated. And the analyst part of my brain kept flagging it, the way you notice 3 unrelated invoices arrive on the same Tuesday and realize they aren't unrelated at all. So when my phone lit up with my mother's name and a voice 3 degrees warmer than it had been in a year, I didn't feel flattered. I felt the small cold click of a lock turning somewhere I couldn't see. "Honey," she said. She only called me honey when she wanted something. "We'd like to take you out to celebrate 25 properly." The way we never quite managed. Every instinct I'd built reading other people's bad news told me the same thing. This is too neat. I said yes sweetly, the way she'd taught me. Then I hung up and sat at my kitchen table for a long time. I thought about the house on Linden Road. I thought about the word blood showing up in the group chat exactly now. And I thought about the manila folder already sitting in my work bag, the one I'd assembled 6 months earlier for reasons that had nothing to do with my mother, and everything to do with finally knowing where I came from. I didn't warn them I'd been to the county clerk. Instead, I made a few calls of my own. Quiet ones. After Nana died, I'd registered with the state adoption reunion registry, half certain nothing would come of it. 8 weeks later, a letter arrived in handwriting I didn't recognize, careful and looping, the hand of a woman who'd practiced what she wanted to say. It was from Susan Hale. She wrote that she had been 19 when she gave me up, that she had not wanted to, that she had thought about me every March for 25 years, and that if I ever wanted to meet her, she would drive any distance, any day, no expectations. She'd signed it, and then under her name, one more line, the one I read so many times the paper went soft. "I never stopped saving you a seat." The second envelope came 3 days later, and it had nothing to do with Susan. Our state had only recently opened original birth records to adult adoptees, and I'd filed my request the week Susan's letter arrived. While I was in the county system, professional habit led me to pull the file on Nana's estate. And there it was in the distribution schedule of the Ruth Mercer Family Trust, executed 2 years before her death, administered not by my parents, but by a bank. The caregiver distributions to Wesley and Diane Mercer shall terminate upon the beneficiary's 25th birthday, whereupon the remainder shall pass to my granddaughter, Paige. Not their estate. Hers. Held by a trustee they couldn't touch, scheduled to leave their hands forever on the exact date they'd chosen for that dinner. 2 envelopes in 1 week. One told me where I'd come from. The other told me, in my grandmother's notarized hand, exactly what my parents were about to lose and why they were suddenly in such a hurry. I took a personal day, drove the trust documents to an estate's attorney with no connection to my family, and paid her out of my own savings to confirm what I already suspected. The caregiver distributions were legitimate, ongoing, and ending. The remainder passed to me through a corporate trustee, and there was nothing my parents could file, sign, or shred to stop it. Their will was irrelevant. Their disownment was theater performed on the wrong stage. My attorney asked if I wanted to notify them, soften the landing. I said no. I wanted 3 things in a folder, and that was all. The retainer letter so they'd know I had counsel, the trust's distribution schedule so they'd see the date in black and white, and my original birth certificate with Susan Hale's name in the mother's line. So when the moment came, the table would understand exactly which family I was choosing to leave and which one I was choosing to keep. I labeled the tab, closed the folder, and carried it for 6 months like a quiet engine I hadn't turned on yet. The dinner invitation only told me when to turn the key. I met Susan for the first time in a diner halfway between our cities because she didn't want me to drive too far. That small consideration undid me more than any speech could have. She was nervous. She'd brought a photo album she kept opening and closing without showing me, like she wasn't sure she'd earned the right. She had my chin and my way of going quiet when she felt too much. Over 6 months, we built something carefully, the way you'd repair a bridge while standing on it. I learned I had a half-brother named Danny, 20, all elbows and questions, who texted memes within a week of meeting me as if I'd always been there to receive them. I learned my birth grandmother was a small, ferocious woman named Pearl who took one look at me and said, "Well, there she is, like I'd just been late, not gone for a quarter century." They never asked me for anything. No favors, no money, no role to perform. Susan told me the 3rd time we met the thing that became the truest line of my life. "We've kept a seat for you, sweetheart." We never gave it to anyone else. And I, who could draft a flawless beneficiary clause for a stranger, who knew the precise legal language of belonging, sat in a vinyl booth and did not know what to do with my own hands. Because I had been wanted for the first time by people who got nothing out of wanting me. After 25 years of being useful, I had no idea how to simply be welcome. The night my mother booked Vanterre, I called Susan and asked a question I'd been too afraid to ask anyone in my life. Would you come to my birthday dinner? I explained the whole shape of it, the parents, the suspicions, the trust, the speech I could feel coming. I told her I didn't want to hear it alone. And I no longer wanted to perform the grief they were counting on. Susan didn't hesitate for a second. What time and where? And should we dress up? Then she said something that made me put my hand over my mouth in my kitchen. We'd be honored, she said, to watch you not need them. So I made one more call to Vanterre and booked a second table under my own name. Party of 3. Table 9, near the back, 3 tables behind the reservation, already on the books for a Mercer party of 3 at the front. I almost laughed at the geometry of it. They had no idea they'd be performing my disownment within sight of the family that had spent 25 years saving me a chair. We ordered drinks before anyone said a true thing. My mother praised the wine list. My father told a story about parking he'd already told in the car. Then Diane folded her hands and shifted into the voice, the one she used when she returned a Christmas gift in front of me and explained why it hadn't been practical. We've always done our very best for you, she began. Wesley nodded along a half-second behind, the way he'd nodded behind her for 30 years. We gave you a roof, an education. More than some children ever get. I let her talk. I rested one hand flat on the manila folder and watched my father's eyes flick down to it and away. The folder had a label on the tab, just the top edge showing above my fingers. He could see 4 letters if he looked. And he looked. I covered the rest with my thumb, not to hide it, just to let him wonder. And I watched the wondering start to work on him. Then my mother paused, took a small sip, set the glass down with the precision of a woman reaching a slide she'd practiced, and said the line that opened the door to everything. There's something, Paige, that you should have been told a very long time ago. You're adopted, she said, the way you'd announce a change to a dinner reservation. We adopted you when you were an infant. You were never biologically ours. She watched my face while she said it, waiting for the collapse. This was the moment she'd built the whole evening around, the corner table, the cashmere, the practiced pauses. All of it engineered to land right here. It landed. Some part of a person always braces for the floor to be there. But I'd had 6 months to learn this already, and the only thing my mother actually revealed that night was how little she knew about me. She leaned in, almost gentle, and delivered the sentence I will hear in quiet kitchens for the rest of my life. We only kept you for the benefits. She smiled when she said it. A woman does not smile delivering the worst news of your life unless she has rehearsed it enough times to enjoy the choreography. And in that smile, I finally saw the whole shape of it. I hadn't been a daughter who disappointed them. I'd been an asset that had finished depreciating. My father tried to explain it like an accountant defending a tax position. There had been monthly subsidy payments in the early years. Tax considerations after that. And Nana had certain expectations about family. Adopting me had helped them meet those expectations, and meeting them had been, in his careful word, worthwhile. I sat very still and let the arithmetic of my childhood rearrange itself into its true equation. The 1 cupcake. The hand-me-downs from Brett with the return tags still on them. The way the heat got turned down in my room first. They hadn't been poor. They'd been pocketing the difference between what a child costs and what a child generates, and I had been the generator. We invested in you, Wesley said, as if that settled it. As if a child were a rental property with a depreciation curve. Then my mother, impatient with his bookkeeping, cut to the line the whole evening had been built to deliver. You're 25 now. There's simply nothing further that keeping you up does for us. She said it almost regretfully, the way you'd note that a coupon had expired. Then my father did the thing he'd come to do. He reached into his leather portfolio and slid a thin sheath of papers across the tablecloth until it touched my plate. We've already filed, he said, to formalize things. You won't be in the will. You won't be a beneficiary on anything. We wanted to do this cleanly in person so there'd be no confusion later. I read the caption on the first page in about 4 seconds, the way I'd read 1,000 of them. And I saw immediately what they had done. They had filed against the wrong instrument. They'd spent good money cutting me out of an estate that was almost beside the point, while leaving entirely untouched the document that actually decided everything. I didn't correct them. You don't tell the other side they've sued the wrong defendant. You let them finish. So I slid the papers an inch back toward the center of the table, neither accepting nor refusing, and let them keep believing they'd won. Then my Aunt Renee's voice arrived on speakerphone from my mother's purse, because of course Renee was listening, because Renee had been the architect of half of this. Blood looks after blood, Paige, she said, warm as a knife in soup. You've always understood that. I didn't cry. Some 12-year-old still living in my chest had been braced for this exact table since the night Brett told her she wasn't real. But 25-year-old me just took a slow sip of water and set the glass down without a sound. And I watched something cross my mother's face I had never seen there before. Disappointment, not at me, at the performance. She'd written the scene with a sobbing girl in the lead, and the girl wasn't sobbing, and it was ruining her ending. Aren't you going to say anything? She asked, and there was an edge in it now. Then she made the mistake people like her always make. She filled the silence by reaching for the line that had worked the first time. We only kept you for the benefits, she repeated slower, leaning on each word. But a sentence loses its teeth the second time you hear it from the same mouth. The first time it had been a revelation. The second time, it was just a confession, and not about me. Shortly after, Renee arrived in person with Brett trailing behind her, both feigning surprise. My mother liked an audience for her best work, and she especially liked one that would apply pressure if I got difficult. Renee got right to it. Families have to make hard choices about who's really part of them. You've always been such a practical girl, Paige. You understand that blood looks after blood. There it was again. That word, the one she'd been planting in the group chat all year, finally said out loud at the table it had been built for. I looked at my aunt, who had answered for my mother the day I turned 8 and explained to a child why she wasn't worth a party. And I felt the last thread of obligation in me go slack. These were not people I was losing. These were people I was setting down. I'd carried them a long way, longer than they deserved, and my arms were finally, gloriously tired. Across the table, my father wasn't joining in. He was staring at his hands. Then, while Renee was mid-sentence, Wesley leaned toward me and said something low. Your grandmother loved you, he said quietly. He stopped there. For a moment I saw the whole other version of Wesley Mercer, the one who might have existed if he'd ever once chosen a harder thing over a comfortable one. His eyes were wet. And some part of him understood that the woman he loved had built a wall around me with her own money precisely because she didn't trust her son to protect me. I waited. I genuinely waited because there was a version of that night where my father said the next sentence, the apology, the I'm sorry, this is wrong, I won't do this, and I would have heard it, and it would have mattered. But he looked at my mother, who was watching him the way a handler watches a dog that's wandered toward the road. And I saw him choose. He sat back. He picked up his water. The almost sentence died in his throat where so many of his almost sentences had died over the years. That was the closest thing to love anyone at the front table offered me all night. It lasted 4 words and a swallow. My mother then produced one more page, a release form, uncapping a pen and setting it across the paper like a small gift. It's just an acknowledgement, she said. Sign it and we can all have a civilized dinner and go our separate ways. I read it in seconds. It wasn't an acknowledgement. It was a waiver-wearing one, designed to have me agree on the record that I'd been notified and had no claim. The kind of thing a careful lawyer drafts to head off exactly the challenge I was in a position to bring. They wanted my signature while I was still bleeding from the reveal, before the shock wore off. My mother was counting on my wound. She didn't know it had a trust attached to it. I left the pen where it lay. My father kept glancing at my manila folder, and I watched the worry climb up his neck in a slow red tide. He was doing the arithmetic now, the same arithmetic I'd done 6 months before, and the answer was beginning to scare him. Is there something we should know, Paige? He asked. I smiled at him, the first real smile of the night. Not yet, I said. Then I asked him the question, not loudly, not as a daughter, in the voice I use at the firm when I found the flaw in someone's filing. Dad, which instrument did you file under? Your estate or Nana's trust? The table went quiet in a new way. My mother's wine glass paused on its way to her mouth. Renee's hand stopped patting. Wesley blinked at me like I'd started speaking a language he half recognized from a country he'd never visited. Because in 8 words, I'd told them 3 things they hadn't budgeted for, that I knew there was a difference between the two, that I knew which one mattered, and that I'd known long enough to learn the vocabulary cold. What? My mother said. It came out smaller than she meant it to. I let the question sit. I turned my water glass a quarter turn on the cloth, lined it up with the edge of the manila folder, and then I opened it. No flourish. No slammed document. No speech. I simply turned the folder so it faced them and laid the 3 pages out on the white cloth, side by side, the way I'd lay exhibits in front of a client who needed to understand their own situation. The retainer letter first, with the firm's letterhead and the line confirming I was represented by counsel. The distribution schedule of the Ruth Mercer Family Trust second, with the relevant paragraph in black and white. And third, my original birth certificate with Susan Hale's name where my mother had assumed her own name belonged. I didn't point at anything. I let the paper do the work paper does. My mother's eyes went to the trust schedule first because some animal part of her had always known where the money slept. I watched her read it. I watched the words go in. The caregiver distributions to Wesley and Diane Mercer shall terminate upon the beneficiary's 25th birthday, whereupon the remainder shall pass to my granddaughter, Paige. I watched her reach the word remainder and the word Paige, and I watched the color leave her face from the top down, like a window shade being drawn. She looked up at me, then at Wesley, then back at the page. Mom, I said gently, because I could afford to be gentle now. You filed against the wrong family. The one you cut me out of was always the smaller one. It took her about 10 seconds to assemble the full picture. The house on Linden Road funded by the trust she'd assumed she'd live in forever. The monthly distributions that had quietly furnished her comfortable life, ending tonight, by their own terms. The remainder passing on this exact date to the daughter she'd just told she was finished with. And the waiver, her clever little waiver that I'd been seconds from signing, worth precisely nothing, because it released a claim on an estate that was never where the value lived. She had aimed every weapon she owned at a will, and missed the trust entirely. The cruelty had been free. The mistake had been expensive. Then I learned the last thing my mother had to teach me: people like her never apologize when they're caught. They pivot. Her face rearranged itself, the cold draining out and a terrible warmth flooding in. She reached across the table for my hand. Paige, she said, and her voice had gone soft and maternal in a way it had never once been when it cost her anything. We're still your parents. Whatever's in those papers, we're family. The word family from the mouth that 20 minutes earlier had said, we only kept you for the benefits. I looked at her hand reaching for mine. And I did not take it. I stood up the way you'd rise from any table, no drama, just a woman pushing her chair back and reaching for her folder. Sit down, my mother said, the soft maternal mask slipping instantly, the old cold control snapping back. Sit down, Paige. Where on earth do you think you're going? Renee straightened. Brett stopped smirking. My father just looked tired, the look of a man watching the only good thing his mother ever did walk out of his reach forever. I picked up the folder, held it against my chest, and looked at my mother, who had spent 25 years trying to make me understand that I had no real place anywhere. My birth family is sitting 3 tables behind you, I said. I didn't say it cruelly. I didn't need to. The sentence had been true for the entire meal. True while she smiled and rehearsed and slid her waiver across the cloth. True the whole time. She believed she was performing my disownment to an audience of strangers. She hadn't been. She'd been performing it within arm's reach of the people who'd been saving me a chair since before she ever decided I'd stopped being useful. And I watched my words travel across the table and land. And I watched my mother begin, very slowly, to turn around in her seat. The cashmere shoulders rotated. Her chin came around. And there at table 9, 3 tables back, beneath the warm low light, were Susan and Pearl and Danny, who had been there the entire time, who had ordered quietly and eaten almost nothing, who had watched my mother deliver the worst sentences of my life and kept their composure because I'd asked them to let me come to them. Susan met my mother's eyes first. She didn't glare. She didn't gloat. She just looked at the woman who had raised her daughter on one candle and a calculator. Then she looked at me, and her whole face opened like a window in spring. My mother's gaze went from Susan's chin to mine and back again, doing the resemblance math. And I saw the exact moment she understood that the family she'd just told me I didn't have was sitting 15 feet behind her in real chairs at a real table, having watched her do the one thing she could never take back. In front of witnesses she didn't know she had. She turned back to me and her mouth opened. Nothing came out. For the first time in my entire life, my mother had no script. And in the silence where her next cruel line should have been, a chair scraped back at table 9. They stood up, all three of them. Not to make a scene, not to confront anyone, just to be on their feet when I crossed the room to them, the way you stand for someone arriving at a gate after a long flight. Pearl stood first, because Pearl does everything first. Then Susan. Then Danny, knocking his knee on the table leg in his hurry. They didn't say a word to my parents. They didn't have to. Their standing said the entire thing. The restaurant had gone quiet around us, the particular hush of strangers who can feel that something true is happening and have stopped pretending not to watch. A waiter froze with a tray. And I walked, past my mother, still half-turned in her chair. Past Renee, whose mouth had finally run out of the word blood. Past my father, who lifted his eyes to me as I passed, and then dropped them again, choosing comfort one last time. 15 feet. 3 tables. 25 years. When I reached them, Pearl took my face in both her hands, the way Nana used to, and Susan pulled out the empty chair beside her own, the 4th chair, the one they had asked the host to set, even though their reservation was for 3. "We saved you a seat," Susan said. "We always did." And I sat down in it, the seat that had been waiting my whole life, at the table that had wanted me before they knew if I'd ever come. That was when my mother lost the one thing she'd never lost in front of people. Her composure. I heard her chair scrape. Heard her stand. Heard the front table calm she'd worn all evening crack straight down the middle. "After everything we paid for," she said, and it wasn't quiet anymore. It carried across the dining room, sharp and rising. "After everything we did for you, the schools, the roof, the years you do this to us in public? You humiliate your family over money." Heads turned openly. A man at the bar set down his drink. Renee was tugging at my mother's sleeve, hissing, "Diane, sit down, people are looking," but my mother was past the reach of her own handler for the first time in her life, because the script was gone. And all she had left was the truth coming out sideways. "We gave you everything," she said to a room full of strangers. And I noticed she said gave, not loved. Even now, even cornered, the word love would not come. Because it had never been in the inventory. I stayed in my seat at table 9. I didn't stand to match her. I didn't raise my voice. Susan's hand had found mine under the table, and I just held it and let my mother be loud, because the loudness was doing my work for me. Every person in that restaurant was watching a calm young woman seated quietly with people who clearly adored her, and a furious older woman shouting about everything she'd paid for. There is not a human being alive who hears a parent screaming about money and thinks, there's the real family. My father never stood at all. He just put his face in his hands. I let her run out of words the way a storm runs out of rain. And when the quiet came back, I did one last thing. I walked the 3 tables back to the front and set a single page on the white cloth in front of her, the trust's distribution schedule, face up. "You can keep this one," I said. "You'll want to understand what ended today and what didn't." Then I looked at the 2 of them. My mother, who had priced me at 1 candle. My father, who had loved his own mother too much to honor what she'd asked of him. And I said the only sentence I'd prepared in advance, the one I'd written in my head in the parking lot, and decided I'd only use if I earned it. "You kept me for the benefits," I said. "They kept a seat for me." Then I turned around and walked back to table 9. And I did not look behind me again. Not once. Pearl had ordered me a slice of chocolate cake while I was gone. Danny had stuck the little restaurant candle in it, a single candle lit. For 1 second, the symmetry of it caught in my throat. 1 candle, the exact number I'd gotten every birthday of my life. Then Susan leaned over and said, "Blow it out, sweetheart. Make the wish." And I realized I didn't have one. I already had it. The trust did exactly what my grandmother built it to do. On my 25th birthday, the caregiver distributions to Wesley and Diane Mercer ended on the date, and by the terms Nana had notarized 2 years before she died. The remainder passed to me through the bank trustee, untouched by the will my parents had spent good money revising. Because you cannot disinherit someone from a trust you don't control. Within a year, my parents sold the house on Linden Road. Without the distributions, they couldn't carry it. I'm told Renee was furious to learn that none of Nana's money would be flowing toward Brett after all. I didn't sue anyone. I didn't post anything. I simply stopped answering, and I let the silence be the boundary, which is the only kind that ever holds. My father texted me once, a few weeks later. 3 words, "I am sorry." No name. No follow-up. When I didn't reply, he never tried again. I heard later that when Renee tried to rally the family to contest Nana's trust, it was Wesley who quietly shut it down, told them their mother had every right to leave her money where she pleased, that it was finished. He was right. He was also, as ever, a year too late, saying it to the wrong room, when it cost him nothing and changed nothing. That was the whole of my father in the end, a man who knew the right thing, even felt it, but could only ever bring himself to do it once doing it had stopped requiring anything of him. I spent that first real birthday eating chocolate cake at table 9 with people who got nothing from wanting me. And I have spent every birthday since with them. Susan and I talk every Sunday now, 4 o'clock, the hour I used to save for Nana. Pearl taught me to make her grilled cheese. Danny still sends memes. And somewhere in my new family's kitchen, there is a photo album that doesn't close anymore because it finally has enough pages. Being useful was all my parents ever wanted from me. Being wanted was the one thing I'd never had. And it took me 25 years and one terrible dinner to learn that anyone who only keeps you for the benefits has already told you, in the plainest language there is, that they were never your family at all. One candle for 24 years. And on the 25th, a whole table that lit them all without being asked.